Dear friends, today is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I think for many of us, we often find ourselves struggling a little bit in terms of what to do with this day. Because after all, we have a day. It's called Tisha B'Av. And on Tisha B'Av, we go ahead and we remember all of the destruction that our people have experienced over the last 2,000 years. We remember every single Jewish catastrophe and calamity. And I think for many of us, the Holocaust figures prominently into that, less than a century away. Many of us families of survivors. And so that's the day we mourn everything. But nevertheless, on Yom HaShoah, however you identify with it, however you relate to it, if in Eretz Yisrael, the siren is going off and there's a moment of silence, it behooves us to remember the 6 million Kiddushim as well. But the question becomes, what do we do? What is our avoda on this day? So it's easy to say it's to remember. And I think, that obviously, we can't let the 6 million Kiddushim disappear into the sands of time, which as the survivor generation slowly ebbs away and leaves us, there is real danger about that. Even now, we relate to the Holocaust so differently. You know, for many of us, the Holocaust is part of our familial fabric. It's not just part of our national fabric. For many of us, again, with parents and grandparents who are survivors, the Holocaust and its aftermath is part of daily life. It's part of every Shabbos, it's part of every Yom Tov, it's part of every family gathering, it's part of every trip to the cemetery when the names of our loved ones who don't have a burial place are inscribed on the back of the matzevos, the back of the stones of those who were zoche to come to Gvuras Yisrael. So I don't need to be reminded. I mean, it's part and parcel of who I am, it's part and parcel of my life, it's part and parcel of the way it informs and it shapes the way that I live. But what is our general avoda? So I think perhaps our avoda is to be inspired. I know that may sound a little bit strange, given the fact that the goal is to remember that's what's been lost, and isn't that like the opposite of inspiration? But I don't think so. You know, one of the most moving and meaningful set of Sarim that I possess is a set of Sarim called Shalos Tshuvas Mima'amakim, which is a 6-volume series authored by Rav Ephraim Oshry. Rav Oshry was the Rav of the Kovna Ghetto after Rav Elchanan Wasserman Hashem Yikom Damo was murdered by the Lithuanians at the 9th Fort. Rav Elchanan Wasserman becomes the Rav of the Kovna Ghetto. That wasn't an elected position. He didn't try out for the position. It was a de facto position that became his by dint of the fact that people lining up at his door asking him the most heartbreaking, overwhelming life and death questions. Rav Oshry recorded the answers, and in the aftermath of the war, during the war, he pledged that if he would survive, he would write all of this down and compile this for future generations to see the Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice of Am Yisrael, to adhere to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to his Torah, even in the midst of the greatest darkness. And after the war, he fulfilled that vow. Rav Oshry survived, settled in the Lower East Side, was a Rav there, and he fulfilled that vow. And he wrote 6 volumes. And these are tshuvas, these are questions that were asked him in the ghetto. And then after the war, he went back, he cited sources, and really made it into a tremendous encyclopedic work that really documents the horrors of the Holocaust and the spiritual heroism of the Holocaust. And in the second chelik, in chelik Beis, one of the first tshuvas that he writes is a fascinating tshuva about a young boy, a 16-year-old boy. And he gives the history of this. He said, you know, when the Germans came into Lithuania, they killed anyone they could find, any Jew they could find, men, women, children. And he tells a story about a particular family in Kovno. And the parents were murdered. Most of the children were murdered, but somehow one son, a 16-year-old boy, he escaped. And then he was hidden by the cleaning lady. The Jewish family had a Gentile cleaning lady, and she hid him. And she hid him for a little while, but then it became too precarious for her to do so. And so she brought this boy to the local church. She gave him to the priest. And the priest says to the 16-year-old boy, look, I could hide you, but you have to reject your God and accept our God. And this boy, this 16-year-old boy, Rav Oshry writes, was so filled with anger and so filled with animosity, but it wasn't really anger, it was pain. It was pain over what he saw happen to his mother, to his father, to his younger siblings, and he saw it all. It happened all in front of his eyes. And he was so filled with this hurt and this pain and this rage. And he says, yes, I reject the God of the Jewish people and accept your God. The priest baptized him there on the spot, and he had safe refuge in the church. And Rav Oshry tells a story that this boy even though he was in the safety of the walls of the church, could find no rest. He couldn't sleep. Everything was tumultuous, was turbulent. And finally, after a number of months in the church, he said, I have to go back to my people. He goes over to the priest. The priest says, are you crazy? You're going to die. You're going to die. There is no question you're going to die. Your people are being annihilated, liquidated. There's no point. There's no point. And even Rav Ashri said, and the priest says to the boy, he says, even your own God, even the Jewish God would want you to live out the war. What are you doing? The boy says, I have to go back. I have to go back. And sure enough, he leaves the safety and security of the church and he goes back to the Kovna ghetto, where he's immediately plunged into famine, into darkness. And the people are there, they're shocked. To a certain degree, they don't know what to do with him. Rav Ashri says they came to him with the following shaila. The boy was a Kohen. So the shaila was, is he allowed to duchen? And is he allowed to get the first aliyah? And Rav Ashri, this is in the tshuvas that he compiled after the war. So he goes through it. And again, it's a fascinating halachic discussion of Kohen Shehimir Daito. If a Kohen goes ahead and essentially throws off the yoke of faith, becomes an apostate, becomes agnostic, goes to a different religion, what's his status? And again, there are poskim. Is he allowed to duchen? Does he get rishon in terms of the Beis Hamikdash? Can he get truma afterwards? So and Rav Ashi goes to the whole shayla. At the end of the tshuva, he actually quotes a fascinating Mordechai. The Mordechai was the primary disciple of Rabbeinu Gershom, and he quotes a Mordechai. And the Mordechai essentially says that even a Kohen who left the fold and then comes back, he's allowed to go ahead and duchen, he's allowed to go ahead and get rishon. And the Mordechai, interestingly enough, was even talking about a Kohen who left willingly. Rav Ashri says this boy's departure from Yiddishkeit cannot be called willingly. Even though at the end of the day, okay, you could say, he willingly cast off the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't willingly. How can you call a casting off of the yoke because you saw your parents and your siblings murdered in front of your eyes? How can you call that a willful casting off of the yoke? And Rav Ashri paskined that alocha l'maisa, he should be accepted back with open arms. He could duchen, he could get rishon. And then the end of the story ultimately, again, is that this boy was killed with the remaining residents of the Kovna ghetto in 1943. He was exterminated with thousands of other Jews in the ghetto. Rav Ashri describes, and it's almost amazing. It's almost amazing that Rav Ashri said the joy on this boy's face when he met the collective plight of his brothers and sisters. Rav Ashri said he felt with this boy that he felt privileged to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name. And it's an overwhelming tshuva. The halacha is overwhelming, the lamdas is overwhelming. But what struck me is that what Rav Ashri was really saying was, you can't extinguish the neshama of a Jew. You could batter his body. You could torture him. You could abuse him. But no matter what you do, you cannot exterminate the light of his soul. You cannot extinguish the luminescent holiness of the Yiddish neshama of the Jewish soul. You can't. You can't. This boy could not find rest in the safety of the church. He had to come back to his people. His neshama somehow was pulling him back to the Kovna ghetto. That's the power of the neshama. You know what it struck me? There are many inspiring stories that came out of October 7th. And, I think for many of us, one of the most inspirational figures that emerged was a young man, by the name of Yehuda Becher. Right? Yehuda Becher was at the Nova Festival. But, there were video clips, and then it became this very popular song, a song that Yehuda Becher used to sing, the Elokai Neshama. Elokai Neshama Shenatata Bi Tehorahi Ata Ata Yitzarto Ata Nefachta Bi. And, he recorded it, I think it was on one of on his phone while he was driving. And this became like an anthem in the aftermath of October 7th. It struck me, Yehuda Becher was from a religious family, but I don't know his story. Found his own way. Right? It seems like a very different way than the rest of his mishpacha. He was at the Nova Festival, not with his mishpacha on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. He found his own way. And how striking was it that, this boy who found his own way, a different way than his family, a different way than many of us, yet what was his anthem? His anthem was Elokai, Neshama Shenasata Bi Tahori Hashem. The neshama that you have placed in my body is so holy. The 16-year-old boy in Kovno, who could not stay away from his people, even though his personal safety was guaranteed. Yehuda Becher, who despite maybe being different than the rest of his family, his neshama was right there with the rest of Klal Yisrael, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with his mishpacha, with Torah. Both of these boys, the unnamed 16-year-old boy in the Kovno ghetto, and Yehuda Becher, Hashem Yikom Damam, at the Nova Festival, they sang the same song. It was the song of Hashem, the neshama that you've given me is so pure. It's incredible. Two boys, almost a century apart, yet singing the same exact anthem, the same song. Elokai neshama shenasata bi tahorehi. Hashem, the soul that you have given me, it's so pure. The world could break our bodies, which they've done over the last 2,000 years, but they can never break our soul. Nothing could ever extinguish the neshama of a Jew. And this, dear friends, to me, is the message of Yom HaShoah. So while it is a day of remembrance of all we have lost, I would like to suggest that it is also a day of profound inspiration, because we remember almost virtual annihilation less than a century ago. And look at where we are. Look at who we are. Yeah, we have plenty of problems, plenty of issues, plenty of things we have to work out. Way too much infighting, way too much machlokes. Yeah, I got it, a lot of problems. But we're here. And we're not just here surviving, we're here thriving. Why? Because Elokai neshama shenasata bi tahorehi. Because we are led sometimes in life, it's not the elders who lead us. Sometimes it's the youth. Sometimes it's a 16-year-old boy in Kovno, and sometimes it's a 20-something-year-old man at the Nova Festival. Sometimes it's the young people who really show us the beauty of who and what we are. Elokai neshama shenasata bi tahorehi. It was their anthem. It was our anthem. And it speaks to the greatness of our people. So we may shed a tear, or many tears, copious tears, for the 6 million Kedoshim. But at the same time, we also smile. We also hold our head up high. We are also filled with pride. Because no matter what the world throws our way, the neshama of Klal Yisrael, individually and collectively, propels us higher and higher. May the neshamas of the 6 million Kedoshim enjoy eternal rest, tachas kanfei Ashchina, in the highest levels of Gan Eden reserved for those who are taken from this world, HaKiddush Hashem. May we, their families, their offspring, find tremendous nechama, but most of all, may we be inspired by their courage, their physical courage, their spiritual courage, and use that inspiration to lead even greater, holier, and more luminescent lives.